So today we are going through 2023 May-June component question paper 13. So again, we're starting at the bottom. Formula for calculating the correct current account balance of payments. I'm not going to spend too long on this. The ones that are wrong, there's no need for me to explain why they're wrong. You just need to look up what the formula is. Formula is given in the current account balance of payments chapter, which is in unit 6 of your slides accessible on the OneDrive. It's the balance of trades and goods, which takes the exports minus the imports from goods, the balance of trade and services, the exports minus the imports for services, primary income balance and secondary income balance. And primary income balance and secondary income balance have a number of different things that are included in them. So compensation of employees, etc. is included in primary income balance. Aid between governments is included in secondary income balance. Gifts or charity donations, etc. So you can look through all them in the slides, but the formula itself is A. Okay, question 29. A developing country's two major sources of income from international trade are fishing and tourism. If the country's exchange rate depreciated, what is likely to happen? Okay, so the main thing we need to know is, right, without even looking at A, B, C or D, what happens when the exchange rate depreciates? So, in terms of exports, prices go down, so total exports will go up, assuming that the PED for exports is elastic. So that means that our total revenue, I should put in there, from exports should rise. In terms of imports, price of imports go up. And why does this happen? If the exchange rate depreciates, that means that people in other countries, right, or they'll be able to get our exports at a cheaper price. They'll be paying less for them in terms of their own currency to exchange it into ours. Whereas for imports, we will be paying more from other countries. So when the price goes up, the total expenditure on imports will go down. Again, assuming that the PED for imports is elastic. So once we know that basic information, if it's appreciation, this is all the opposite. Exports price up, total revenue for exports would be down, and for imports it would be price goes down, total expenditure on imports goes up if it was appreciation. Imported goods would be cheaper for local people. We know that's wrong because we just wrote it out here. Price goes up, so the expenditure on imports go down. The goods imports become more expensive. Country would definitely become poorer. Well, that's an assumption we can't really make. There's no theory as such to back that up. Just because our currency depreciates does not mean that the country will become poorer. The price of fish sold as exports would become cheaper. That's correct, because we've composed it on our list over here. And then tourists to the country would be discouraged by our prices. No, also false. Okay, so question 28. The import of a product from another country has been banned. Which term describes this method of protection? So again, look over your protectionism section. A tariff is a tax, quota is a limit, exchange control is something you can do regarding your currency to affect imports and exports, but when something is banned, it's an embargo. Okay, all those terms are given in the protectionism section. So tariff is essentially a tax, and a quota is a limit on imports. In other words, it's a limit on the number of imports. The embargo is the ban. You'll find that in that section on your slides. Okay, what is certain to encourage a higher level of international trade? So we're looking for something that is definitely going to make us, or internationally, trade happen between countries. Okay, conservation of resources and unstable exchange rates, definitely not. That is not going to create an environment of certainty. So international trade may reduce. The exploitation of resources and wider use of quotas, also definitely not. If we look down here again, quota is a limit on the imports, so that will restrict international trade. It will not help it. For international trade to flourish, we're going to need less tariffs, less taxes, less embargoes, etc., less protectionism measures, and we're going to have to be able to be productive in our own countries for exports as well. So the EU is a great example. Increased support for home countries and increased tariffs, also definitely not. Again, tariffs we've just discussed down here are a method of protectionism that is not going to encourage a high level of international trade. Any form of protectionism measure is designed to protect the home industry. That's why they would be put in place. Protecting the home industry means that we may be producing, buying and selling more in our own country, but not trading with others as much. However, if there's more specialization and falling transport costs, that means that we're going to become more productive and more efficient at making goods and services, and we're going to be able to get them to other countries at a lower price because of the falling transport costs. That will definitely encourage a high level of international trade. So D for question 27. Question 26. What combination of factors might cause a country to be classified as developing rather than developed? Okay, so we know developing is poor, developed is rich, in very simple terms. So, government budget deficit and a low death rate. Okay, a low debt rate may indicate a developed economy. A government budget deficit doesn't necessarily tell us that a country is developing instead of developed. Most developed countries actually run quite a significant budget deficit anyway. Ireland, the US, the UK examples are examples of countries that are all running budget deficits. High birth rate and a low debt rate? No. That would also not indicate a country being developing rather than developed. Large population and a current account deficit? No. Just because they have a large population, that does not tell us if a country is developing or developed. Right? And we already explained the current account deficit. Poor education system and a low standard of living, however, would. Because you would not have a poor education system and a lower standard of living generally in a developed economy, but you would in a developing. For all the others, they might all exist in both a developing and a developed economy, for A, for B and for C in certain circumstances. But for D, that would only apply to a developing economy. Because in order to become developed, they would have to have a decent to high quality education system and a good standard of living. Okay, question 25. What might explain the high population growth in some developing countries? Okay, so what would explain high population growth? Now this should be fairly straightforward. Falling life expectancy is not going to explain high population growth because people would be dying younger than they did before, so we'd expect our population to decrease. If we have less people having babies and more people dying, that's the same. If we have less people coming into the country and more people leaving the country, we would also explain or expect a decline in population growth. However, if we have more children being born through high birth rates and less people dying, we would expect the population of the country to increase. Okay, question 24. What is most likely to cause an increase in relative poverty? So remember that relative and absolute poverty are different. Your chapter on poverty is in Unit 5. Slides and notes are available on the OneDrive. And MCQ and essay questions. Relative poverty is the type of poverty where you're making comparisons between yourself and your others. So you're not in absolute poverty. You can still afford rent, food, water, the basic necessities of life, but you may be poor in comparison to your social circle, so the people that you hang around with, your friends, etc. So, which one would increase absolute? People working beyond retirement age, well, that's likely to decrease relative poverty. They'd be working for longer, they've more money for longer. Increasing state benefits would likely to do the same, as you're giving people more money. Increase in national minimum wage, more people are having a better standard of living and earning more money on average. Again, that would decrease relative poverty. The only one that would increase it would be if the pension increases below the rate of inflation. So let's give an example. If we have a pension increase of 2% and the rate of inflation is 3%, then anybody who's receiving the pension will be 1% worse off than they would have in the previous year. So if that pension increases below inflation, they're going to feel relatively poorer next year than they do this year. Okay, question 23 is very simple. I'm not going to explain too long on it. Countries experiencing a sustained fall in the general price level. What term is used to describe that? That's deflation. Depreciation is the value of the exchange rate going down. A recession is a period where it doesn't matter about the price level for a recession. It's where GDP is falling for 6 months consecutively or more. At market disequilibriums is where we have either a shortage or a surplus, demand and supply are not equal. Deflation is a sustained fall in general price level. Inflation is where the price level is rising. Whoa, sorry about that. Okay, question 22. Which pair is most likely to be provided in the private sector in a mixed economy? Okay, so we've got government intervention and we've got the existence of a private sector in a mixed economy. Weapon manufacturing and defense, that's most likely to be provided by the government in a mixed economy. So think about your America, for example. National defense, weapon manufacturing is done through government organizations as well as privately. Hospitals and tax collection, most mixed economies that I can think of, unless you can correct me, all will have government funded hospitals, and the same with prisons and courts. They will all be funded through the government. So the one that is most likely to be provided by private sectors would be the insurance industry and the banking industry in mixed economies. Okay, question 21. A country is experiencing high economic growth caused by an increase in consumer spending. What are the most likely effects on inflation and unemployment? Okay, so from your inflation and deflation chapter, Unit 4, the last chapter. Again, slides, notes, and questions are all available on OneDrive. Try and figure out what this is doing, right? So an increase in consumer spending is an increase in C, which is a component of our aggregate demand. So aggregate demand is likely to have shifted to the right, causing inflation in these circumstances. So let's draw it, and we can actually possibly see what the likely effects are. So this basically tells us that what's happening here is it's probably going to be demand pull, right? Where aggregate demand moves to the left. So here we have our AD. Here we have our AS. I'm not drawing the Keynesian curve in case anybody is wondering. And AD moves right. Okay. Now, without me filling in the price level, because I think you can see it pretty clearly anyway, I just changed the color here on this. I'll just mark in the points. I just take these across. What do we see has happened? Once we identify that AD has moved to the right, we should be able to identify what has happened with both price level and real GDP. So, GDP has increased. We've moved on to Y1 from the initial point of Y, and price level has also gone up. So price level going up means that we have inflation. So we're left between C and D. And when real GDP rises, what you should all know from my class at this stage is that we can describe that as having employment up, national income up, living standards up. Right? Now, why does that happen? Because if we have an increase in real GDP, remember that would be inflation adjusted real GDP also, it's not nominal. So people are going to have, we're going to have more people working because output has risen. We're going to have therefore more people earning more money, so national income will rise. And if people are earning more money and more people have jobs, we can expect that they will enjoy a better standard of living. So housing, food, shelter, etc., the basic necessities, there'll be a better standard of living in general for the society. So the only option really we can choose here now, which would make any sort of sense whatsoever, would be D. Oh, sorry, not D, C. I read it as employment, not unemployment. Inflation rises and unemployment falls. So like I said over here, employment up. Okay, what is the most likely effect on an economy of a successful supply-side policy? So if you know anything about your supply-side policies, you know that a successful supply-side policy, AS will shift to the right. That's its aim, right? It might take a long time, but we will eventually get there. Now, anytime we shift AS to the right, we can show it as the following. We can either draw it, a supply-side policy effect like this, as a PPC, where we shift to the right, or we can do it as an AD and AS diagram, because essentially it means the same thing. So in this case here, this is my AD and AS. Just put in my text here. This is price level, and this is real GDP. So if I take the drawing here and just mark this in, you'll see that this is the point that we can currently make at, right? Or where our current level of GDP is. However, if AS shifts to the right, okay, we have more potential to move further along this line, which means that we have a potential to increase our GDP, because it's shown in the horizontal axis as GDP. And the same idea is implied by the PPC curve. By being able to shift out, we can move from what was previously only possible as being on this line for our maximum level of output to an increased maximum level of output without having to give up any of the other types of resources of either good A or good B, or capital and consumer goods. Okay, a government wishes to stimulate economic recovery. What action will assist this? So, again, first thing we need to figure out is we're going to stimulate economic recovery. What are we trying to do? We're trying to move AD right. Okay? So, decrease government investment. That would be a decrease in government spending. AD would go left, okay? It's contractionary fiscal. Decreasing income tax is an expansionary fiscal policy. What would happen? AD would go right. We increase indirect taxation. That's not going to stimulate economic recovery. It may help us to reduce budget deficit, but it's going to strangle spending, not increase spending. And increasing interest rates is a contractionary monetary policy. AD would move left. People would be borrowing less money, saving more money, spending less. Decreasing income tax is the only one here that will allow people to spend more money. Therefore, that's the only one that would stimulate economic recovery, or would help in theory with it. Okay, question 18. Which government measure would lead directly to more exports of goods? So this is very simple. Devaluation of the currency. If you look at my video for question paper 12, talked about depreciation, and devaluation is the same. What it does is it results in the price of exports going down, which means that the total revenue for exports would go up because people in other countries would be able to buy our exports at a cheaper price. Okay. Government wishes to increase its spending on public goods. Which sector should have a spending increase to achieve this? Okay, this is actually quite a difficult question because you might not have gone into this detail before, but the correct answer is national defense. Okay, now I'll explain why. National defense covers a variety of different areas, and public goods, if you think about it, they're often staffed. So your public parks, etc., are often staffed or they're looked after by members of the National Defence Force. Education, healthcare and railways are all very specific areas of spending. National defence is the only one that's vague and offers up the possibility to be staffed or to be looked after by National Defence Forces. So the spending on public goods would come through this area for a government. Okay, question 16. What is a reason why firms making similar products sometimes locate near each other? So, competition is decreased? No. Just because they move beside each other doesn't mean they've any less competition. They're still, if I'm Coca-Cola and I move into a factory right beside Pepsi, doesn't mean that Pepsi are making any less bottles of Pepsi or selling any less bottles of Pepsi. The competition between myself and Pepsi is still the same. Transport costs may be eliminated, also completely irrelevant, because the transport costs are individual to each business or to each competition. Myself as Coca-Cola, I'm going to have my own transport costs. Pepsi will have their own transport costs. Just because I move beside them doesn't mean that I can start to use their trucks to transport my goods and services and not pay. So transport costs will be stagnant or remain the same. Internal or external economies of scale. Okay, so external, factors outside of our control. Internal, factors within our control. Okay, now why would we move or why would we locate ourselves near each other? because there's external economies of scale. Okay, internal economies of scale is something that we can control within our business, like we've got financial economies of scale, marketing economies of scale. The external economies of scale would influence the location decisions of a firm, as it would make their average cost specifically reduced at that location. The internal economies of scale is something that can be achieved irregardless of the location, as long as you have a minimum level of resources that are available, like you might have skilled management or skilled workers living in that area. But the external is relating to the location itself, because it's outside of our control from the business, so we would move to that area to take those benefits of that specific location, allowing our average cost to be lower than it would be at another location. Okay, question 15, I won't spend too long on this. You can look over your types of integration. Again, I think it's in Unit 3. Horizontal, same area. So that would be 1 and 3, which are both shoe manufacturers. So we take over a business, or we have a merger between two of the same, basically. That's why it's horizontal, so they're both on the same level. Okay, question 14. What is a likely reason why firms do not grow in size? Okay, so external diseconomies of scale, internal economies, straight away. Anything that's an economy of scale, take that out, because that means their average cost is reduced, so it makes them more likely to be able to expand or to grow. So we're just going to look at the diseconomies of scale. Now, if we have diseconomies of scale that are at a high level of output, that still may make it very difficult for us to grow in size. But it's not going to make it as hard as if we have internal diseconomies of scale at low levels of output. Okay, the lower the level of output that we have, and we combine that with a high average cost as we get bigger, that's going to make it very difficult for us to grow in size. Whereas if we have a high average cost at a high level of output, it will still make it difficult to grow in size, but not to the same extent as if we're only producing a few goods and services and our costs are already high. Okay, question 13. What is likely to increase the bargaining power of a trade union? So, when the economy is experiencing rising cyclical unemployment, definitely not. Cyclical unemployment arises from a lack of AD, so we're unlikely to be able to bargain with our employers in that case for higher wages, etc., due to the state of the economy. PED of a product is not really going to affect the bargaining power of employees. It might affect the revenue of a firm, but it's not going to affect the bargaining power of a trade union or of the employees themselves. What will, however, is if the trade union supplies all the labour. In this case, that's because the employer here, they're going to be heavily relying on this trade union. As the trade union is supplying their labour, they're going to rely on them to basically give their workers for the jobs. So that might allow the trade union to negotiate better deals for their employees. And when the labour market moves from long-term to short-term contracts, okay, it's possible in certain circumstances that may actually allow bargaining power to increase, but it's very unlikely. When will a central bank act as a lender? That will be when a commercial bank faces a liquidity crisis. So they're only going to step in if the commercial bank is in serious financial difficulty, and they'll step in terms of giving them a loan or bailing them out, etc. Functions of a central and commercial bank are all covered units 2 and 3. So commercial bank reduces its lending rates. Central bank is not going to lend in that case, because the commercial bank will lend itself to consumers when they need to raise share capital. Again, that's a responsibility of the commercial bank. They only step in when there's financial difficulties or liquidity crisis. They need an injection of cash. Okay, question 11. Which row shows a characteristic of money and a function of money? So again, I'm not going to spend too long on this. Very simple. I said it in the other ones for the May-June 2023 papers. You just need to review and learn the characteristics and the functions of money. In this case, the correct answer is A. So characteristic is acceptability, and the function is a medium of exchange. Just go to your chapter 3 on money and revise or learn your characteristics and functions. The government believes that people eat too much sugar but not enough fruit. What combinations of policies would the government introduce? Okay, so the first thing to consider is, if they eat too much sugar, we need to reduce the consumption of sugar. So what we're going to do when we want to reduce the consumption is we're going to increase its tax. Because what we want to do here is we want to shift supply to the left, which will increase the price. And if I bring these down here, and it will reduce the quantity that is consumed. You can see we'll move to Q1 from Q. So for fruit, people are not eating enough fruit, so we want to get them to eat more. So what we'll do in this case is the government will provide a subsidy, because they'll want to shift supply to the right. So we'll want to reach a quantity point around here, which is higher than we were initially. So we'll subsidize their production. Remember that a subsidy shifts supply to the right, indirect tax shifts supply to the left. Okay, question 9. In a given year, the world output of coal was 3.94 billion metric tons, average yearly price of $252 per metric ton. Several years later, world output was 3.66 billion metric tons at an average yearly price of 120 per metric ton. What might have caused such a fall in the price of coal? Okay, now you can apply a bit of common sense to this question as well, really. The answer would be the switch to renewable sources of energy. Okay, now again, draw your demand and your supply diagram, okay? And try and show what they've told you here. What do we notice? We notice that the quantity is down and the price is down also, right? So we would have started at this level, and we need to find out, okay, how do we get to a point where the price goes down and the quantity goes down also? So in that case, it would have to be demand shifting to the left, right? Because that would result in the quantity being lower and it would also result in the price being lower too, which are the circumstances that they've given us in the question. Now, why would that happen? We might shift to the left if substitutes have become available, such as renewable sources of energy. So all of the other reasons that are given here, half of the world's coal reserves are in 2 countries, the exhaustion of coal seams throughout the world, or the use of coal as a raw material as well as fuel, none of them are going to result in demand shifting to the left, right? Because they don't explain why demand would reduce for coal. The only one that explains that would be the renewable resources, or people are switching to them, essentially meaning that they are substitutes. So alternative products that can be used instead of coal. Question 8. The diagram shows the market for petrol, gasoline. SP is the supply of petrol based on the private cost of petrol production. And SS is the supply of petrol based on the social cost. Okay, so this is our socially optimum output. And this is our current level of output in the free market. What distance shows the market failure? Okay, so the market failure, this is really simple. The market failure is the difference between the two levels of quantity. It's the difference between Q2 here, which is what we want to be consumed, and Q1, which is actually what is being consumed. Okay? SS is the socially optimum output. SP, the equilibrium point for each, this is the current level of output. So the correct answer would be Q2, Q1. And if you want to look over this again, these diagrams are given for merits and demerit goods in Unit 2. For the demerit goods, you have the actual supply level being much higher, like it is here. And we have this area in between. So this is essentially the external cost is the difference between the two. Okay, this one's very simple. In the supply, which supply curve perfectly inelastic? Perfectly inelastic, PES value will be 0.00. You can look at your PES slides in Unit 2. Perfectly inelastic is perfectly vertical, so that would be B. C would be unitary. D would be perfectly inelastic. And A would be PED, because it's downward sloping, not upward sloping. Question 6. The diagram shows the supply curve for a good. What is the name and cause of the movement from X to Y? Okay, so we think about it. What's got to cause this? It's got to be a shift to the right in demand, right? So contraction of supply caused by a decrease in demand? No, because that means demand would have to shift left. Contraction of supply caused by increase in demand? No. Why? Supply has not contracted. Supply has extended from X to Y, because at X we're making this much quantity, but at Y we're making this much quantity. So we've extended the supply level. So extension of supply caused by an increase in demand, option D. What is the feature of a market in equilibrium? Very simple. Oh, sorry, read it wrong. I thought that said demand equals supply. Demand exceeds supply? No. We call that a shortage. That's when we're in disequilibrium. No profits are earned? No, not relevant. The market will clear. And there will be a surplus? No. So surplus and shortage is what happens when we're in disequilibrium. A is the shortage, D is the surplus. No profits are earned. That's not true. For in equilibrium, somebody's earning profit, we can at least assume so. The market will clear. That's true. If we get into disequilibrium, we'll eventually get back into equilibrium through the price mechanism or the market mechanism. But we say that the market is clear at a point of equilibrium. Okay, what is not a microeconomic decision? So basically they're asking us what's a macro. Increasing the price of a product is a micro because it's an individual, studying the behavior of individuals or firms, etc., or households. Household just said that that's micro. Trade union decides to go on strike, that's micro because it's only relating to an industry or a firm. But if a government decides to increase interest rates, that will affect the whole economy. It's a macroeconomic decision. That's why monetary policy is in Unit 4, Macroeconomics. Okay, what is most likely to increase the geographical mobility of labour? So, what is most likely to allow people who are working to be able to move the area or move to another area to live? So, once we know what it means, it should be very easy to answer. Spendings by firms in research and development is not going to affect their mobility, is it? Because if a firm is spending money on developing new products, that's not going to make me or help me to move to another area. But an increase in the quantity of low-cost housing will, because I'll be able to move to areas where previously I might not have been able to afford to live or to get a house. Again, increase in the amount of credit available to firms is not going to affect people individually and how easy it is for them to move from one place to another. Either is spending on apprenticeships and trading. May possibly, but it's more likely to affect their occupational mobility, which is their ability to change jobs, not to change areas. Okay, we're nearly there. Production possibility curve of a country is shifted from PPC1 to PPC2. What has caused the shift? If you watched QP12, I said that when we shift to PPC, it's an increase in the quantity and or quality of resources. Okay, so we need to look for, without looking at A to D, something that will increase quantity and or quality. Okay, decrease in the rate of unemployment. That will not, because our workforce is already set. We're not increasing the quantity of it. All we're doing is moving from inside to on the curve when we have less unemployment. Okay, or if not on the curve, a point that is higher than where we were previously. Fall in the birth rate, that's not going to affect quantity and quality. And technology not being replaced is definitely not either. However, education can. Education can improve the quality of labour, etc. So therefore we will be able to shift our PPC. Okay, GDP per capita in Switzerland is high. What is the reason why Swiss citizens still face the basic economic problem? So this should be fairly easy. Living standards has nothing to do with the basic economic problem. Either is inflation, either is income. It comes from having to make choices. So, limited resources equals unlimited wants equals choice equals scarcity equals opportunity cost. They're all our keywords for the basic economic problem. And the questions are always directed around the same things. So keep those keywords in mind, take them down if you don't have them already, but you should at this stage.